In late 2024, according to a story that spread across YouTube in short order, a team of ex-military divers spent $10 million of anonymous money to slip into the Gulf of Aqaba and film something the world's leading Egyptologists refused to talk about. Hundreds of chariot wheels, horse skeletons still harnessed in place, human bones tangled in bronze, a flash of gold buried under coral. And according to the same story, when the footage reached the experts, they went silent because what those divers found supposedly proved the biblical Exodus really happened, exactly as written, on the seafloor, for anyone brave enough to look. It is a genuinely gripping story. It has been read tens of millions of times. There is just one problem with it. None of it is new, and almost none of it holds up. To understand what is actually down there, and why this story keeps resurfacing every few years, dressed in new clothes, you have to go back to where it actually started. Not 2024. 1978. In 1978, a man named Ron Wyatt claimed he had located the site of the Red Sea crossing at a beach called Nuweiba on the Gulf of Aqaba, the narrow eastern arm of the Red Sea between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Wyatt was not an archaeologist. He was a nurse anaesthetist from Tennessee with no formal training in the field, though over the following 2 decades he would go on to claim he had found nearly 100 separate biblical sites and objects, including Noah's Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, the ashes of the red heifer, and the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. For context, most professional archaeologists spend entire careers hoping for one major find. Wyatt claimed to have stumbled onto nearly everything Judeo-Christian scholars had spent centuries searching for, usually alone, and usually without bringing back anything that could be independently verified. At Nuweiba, Wyatt said he and his diving partners found coral-encrusted formations on the seafloor that matched the shape of chariot wheels, some with 4 spokes, some with 6, some with 8, which he claimed corresponded to different ranks within the Egyptian military of the New Kingdom period. He said there were human and horse bones scattered among the formations. He said he located a stone column on the shore that he believed marked the crossing point, and that it bore an inscription referencing Solomon. Most dramatically, he claimed that during one dive, he actually recovered a chariot wheel, gold-plated, and brought it to the surface, where he later reported it to Egyptian authorities, expecting a national celebration of one of the great archaeological discoveries in history. That is where the story gets strange, and where the modern retelling wants you to believe something happened that the evidence does not support. According to Wyatt, once he handed the wheel over, it disappeared. No museum record, no government statement, no photograph in any official archive. To Wyatt's supporters, this is proof of a cover-up, evidence buried by an establishment terrified of what it would mean for Egyptian history, and for the academic consensus that the Exodus, at least as a mass event on the scale described in Scripture, is not supported by the archaeological record. To nearly everyone who has actually investigated Wyatt's claims, it is proof of something much simpler. The wheel most likely never existed as described in the first place, and there was nothing for any government to hide. Here is the detail almost none of the viral retellings mention. When marine biologists and geologists actually examined Wyatt's photographs of the seafloor formations, they found a mundane explanation sitting in plain sight. Certain species of coral naturally grow into a flat circular plate on top of a narrow stalk-like base, as they expand outward from a fixed point on the rock below. To someone unfamiliar with coral growth patterns, a formation like that, especially photographed at an angle underwater, can look remarkably like a wheel sitting on an axle. Marine biologist Robert Carter, who reviewed the site's imagery, pointed to exactly this coral growth pattern as the far more likely explanation for what Wyatt photographed, rather than actual Bronze Age chariot wheels somehow preserved for 3,500 years in open water. That distinction matters enormously, because it is the difference between an archaeological discovery and a shape that resembles one. The debris fields we have covered on this channel before, the Bismarck sitting upright at 15,000 feet, the Yamato broken into a scattered field of shattered steel off the coast of Kyushu, are confirmed through side-scan sonar mapping, remotely operated vehicle footage, cross-referenced against known construction records, and in most cases, formal expeditions whose findings were published and reviewed by other researchers, sometimes for decades afterward. Robert Ballard did not simply announce he had found the Bismarck. He returned with coordinates, imagery, and a description detailed enough that other historians and oceanographers could evaluate it against the historical record of exactly how and where the ship went down. When the Musashi was finally located in 2015, after an 8-year search funded by Paul Allen, the discovery was confirmed against known specifications of the ship, verified underwater footage of identifiable wreckage, and cross-checked with Japanese naval records before anyone called it settled. That is what verification actually looks like in underwater archaeology. Not a single team's photographs and a story about a missing wheel. Independent confirmation, a paper trail, and other experts able to check the work. None of that ever happened with Wyatt's claims. No independent excavation was conducted at Nuweiba by a professional archaeological team. No peer-reviewed publication exists analysing recovered Chariot material. The stone column Wyatt pointed to as evidence has itself been examined by other researchers, including archaeologist David Merling, who concluded the column style and construction matched Roman-era work, not anything from the time of Solomon, as Wyatt claimed. And perhaps most damning of all, people who worked closely alongside Wyatt, including geologist John Baumgartner, later stated on the record that Wyatt had misrepresented findings and had not been honest about what he had actually found versus what he wanted people to believe he had found. So if the evidence has never held up, why has this story never gone away? Because it keeps getting repackaged. Every few years a new version circulates, sometimes crediting Wyatt directly, sometimes not mentioning him at all, and instead inventing a fresh cast of characters. A covert modern expedition, a mysterious $10 million budget from anonymous backers, ex-military divers, advanced sonar. A sudden wall of academic silence. The 2024 version follows exactly that pattern. There is no verifiable record of the expedition it describes. There is no named research institution, no published findings, no ship registry, no diving team whose credentials can be checked. The specific claim that Wyatt's own recovered wheel simply vanished from any official record after being reported to Egyptian authorities has been circulating since the 1990s, essentially unchanged, decades before this supposed new 2024 dive ever happened. When a modern retelling adds vanishing debris fields and mysterious drag marks on the seafloor to a story that was already unverifiable at its source, that is not new evidence. That is narrative embellishment stacked on top of a claim nobody involved was ever able to prove in the first place. It is also worth being honest about why professional archaeologists have been cautious about the underlying Exodus narrative on strictly evidentiary terms, separate from anything to do with Wyatt personally. Scholars studying the Sinai Peninsula have pointed out that if a population numbering in the hundreds of thousands had wandered the desert for decades, as the biblical account describes, you would expect to find some trace of it. Campsites, pottery, mass graves. To date, none of that has turned up in the archaeological record at the scale the story describes. Egyptian records from the period in question also make no mention of losing an entire elite military force in a single catastrophic incident, which for a civilization that documented its military campaigns extensively, is a notable silence. None of this means the broader question is fully settled in every direction. Historians and archaeologists continue to debate the nature and scale of any underlying historical event behind the Exodus narrative. But that ongoing, careful academic debate is a completely different thing from 100-year-old bronze chariot wheels sitting photogenically on the seafloor, waiting for the right diving team to film them. There is one more thing worth sitting with here, because it says something about how these stories spread in the first place. The very idea that would make this discovery so explosive, physical evidence for an event sacred to 3 major world religions, is exactly what makes it so attractive to share, regardless of whether it holds up. A shipwreck like the Bismarck or the Yamato does not need embellishment to be compelling. The facts alone carry the story. 2,200 men aboard a battleship the Royal Navy fired nearly 3,000 shells at, and still could not sink through gunfire alone. That is not a story that needs a cover-up angle bolted onto it to hold your attention. But a story about vanishing gold and academic silence and a decades-old cover-up taps into something else entirely, the sense that somewhere out there, someone is hiding the truth from you. That feeling is powerful enough to carry a claim a very long way, even when the underlying evidence was never there to begin with. So what is actually sitting on the floor of the Gulf of Aqaba today? Almost certainly coral, naturally occurring formations that, under the right lighting and from the right angle, can resemble something they are not, photographed by a man with no archaeological training, promoted for decades without independent verification, and periodically resurrected in new packaging whenever a new generation of viewers hasn't heard the original version yet. There is no confirmed debris field of Egyptian military chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea. There is no gold wheel sitting in a government vault somewhere. There is, as far as any credible archaeological record shows, no wall of academic silence protecting a secret, because there was never a verified discovery serious enough to require one. The real story here isn't a hidden Pharaoh's army. It's how a 60-year-old, thoroughly investigated and largely discredited claim keeps getting reborn as breaking news, wrapped in the language of secret expeditions and cover-ups, because that packaging travels further online than a plain unglamorous fact ever will. And that plain fact is this: nobody has ever produced a verified chariot wheel from the bottom of the Red Sea. Not in 1978, not since, not in 2024. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, let me know in the comments, and I'll keep making more of these. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you next time.